Can you make rideshare driving your career? Surprisingly, this brings up more elements than you think. This has been another video I've wanted to film for a while. A lot of times after making all these videos, interviewing so many drivers, I noticed that a lot of different things and unique perspectives come up regarding rideshare driving. And this is one I've wanted to talk about because I think there's usually two classes of drivers who start driving or drive for Lyft and Uber, and of course, some kind of gray area in between. But on one end, I meet drivers who say, hey, I just do this for side cash. I don't necessarily rely on the Uber and Lyft income, but it's nice to have, like say if it's a Friday night, as opposed to staying in and just watching Netflix, not really doing anything productive per se. I can go out, make money. That way I can save up for a vacation. I can, just have extra savings. I can use that towards something else, whatever the case is. Then on the other end, I find there's a lot of drivers who say pretty much, hey, I rely on this income. I do this full time. If Uber and Lyft, let's say, went away tomorrow, I'd be in a pretty bad position. And this brings up, I think, and of course, there's people in between, right? You kind of like half rely on it, half not, where they're like, well, I do it a good amount enough, but I do have other jobs, other things I can do. So yes, there's some in between. This brings up a very unique perspective, I think, of two things. One, is it really a viable career long-term, which could be debated, right? Which I'll talk about. But the second thing is the aspect of looking at it as a permanent thing versus a temporary thing, right? And this brings one unique thing to me, one huge thing I remember in accounting, which I don't know if I 100% agree with this, but I think, it's a unique way to look at it, is I remember in accounting, we talked about the concept of a career versus a job, right? And I remember my accounting professors, and granted, it is accounting, so they may be a little bit more aggressive than most professions when it comes to this kind of arena. So look, a career is something that you can make an actual living doing. You get raises. You go from, like, say, a normal associate or an intern even through a first year, then a senior, then a manager, then a senior manager. You work up the ladder. There's upwards mobility, as it's called. You get more and more money the better you get and the more you work, right? Makes sense. This is, on the other end, that's very different than a job. And the acronym, or if that's the right word, maybe that they use is JOB stands for just over broke. And I still remember that, right? Now, granted, do I agree with that or not? Could be debated. But when it comes to rideshare driving, I find for a lot of people, they look at it as a job. And even for a lot of full-time drivers, I have had drivers on this channel say, hey, Mark, I drive full-time. I'm not making that much money as I used to. And I've talked about this in so many videos that rideshare drivers, unfortunately, there is an asterisk on this, don't make as much money as they used to, right? It's like a job. You're pretty much just over broke. You're driving a ton, but if you think about it, what you make as a rideshare driver in terms of that income getting into your Uber or your Lyft platform, whatever app you're using, isn't the full story. You still have to pay for gas. You still have to pay for maintenance. In addition, you're typically more likely than not an independent contractor. So that doesn't even include the taxes that get taken out when tax time rolls around. So you are, in a sense, not maybe completely just over broke, but you're pretty much living paycheck to paycheck. And I think for a lot of drivers, that is a huge issue when it comes to Uber and Lyft. And this is why I think at the end of the day, and I say this to a lot of drivers, I always suggest, one, I said this before, start out part-time. You might start driving in your area and realize, wow, I'm making really good money. Maybe I'll drive a little bit more. But on the other end, you could easily start out part-time and realize, you know what, this is not for me. Remember, your location is the number one factor that determines how much money you can make. You could start out driving, drive for a little bit and realize, you know what, I'm not making that much money at all. I'm way better off finding another job, right? And when it comes to the whole aspect of it being, like, say, a career thing, for lack of a better word, I'm going to be honest, I don't know. Now, for some drivers, and this can get very debated, right? Some people may have different perspectives. When I first started driving, I looked at it as a temporary thing. I was like, I know I'm not going to be a full-time Lyft and Uber driver forever. However, there are some drivers who I've talked to who are in that category, right? I think this is what gets debated, but for me, I find for most people, and this is what I suggest, when you do get into rideshare driving, or if you are driving full time, I still suggest look for other opportunities. I think there's just so much risk to rideshare driving in terms of the insurance aspects if you get into an accident. And like I mentioned, you should have rideshare insurance because the more that you're on the road, statistically speaking, the more likely you are to get into an accident. There are a lot of other tricky things. The maintenance on your car can very easily add up. Uber and Lyft is starting to pay less and less each year. Now, yes, there are a group of drivers, and I've talked about this before, that are now making more money than ever before. I find it's a 75-25 split. 75% of drivers I interview and talk to, and like say comment on this channel and everything, state that they're making way less money than before. 25% of drivers, though, because of different things that have changed, maybe in their area, maybe their bonus structures or whatever, are making more money than ever before. I've met some drivers who are like, hey, I'm never going to stop driving. I make my own hours. I don't have to listen to a boss, and I'm making 6 figures driving. Why would I give up a completely flexible job? I hate to use that word again, but in this case, you're talking casually. Why would I give up this job that's paying 6 figures where I have a flexible schedule? I can spend more time with my kids. If they have a dance recital, I can go to it, right? I don't have to take time off. And I get instant cash outs and all this kind of stuff. Why would I give this up? So there are drivers, I might as well say, that are looking at it as almost a more of a career opportunity where they're like, hey, I'm a full-time rideshare driver, right? And I do want to say too, on this video, I might as well say, there's nothing wrong with being a full-time driver, right? There's a lot of people who like to do taxi driving full-time, or driving a limo full-time, or being a truck driver full-time. These industries are incredibly important to our economy and are super vital. When it comes to rideshare driving, though, and I think this is where it gets a little different, at least to me, if you look at it versus, like, say, being a truck driver, for example, is just the way Uber and Lyft treats your employees. Another big thing that I've talked about is deactivation. It's gotten way too common where if there's a dispute between you and a passenger, like say even if alcohol is involved, not with you, but with the passenger, or hopefully not with you, right? And they complain to Lyft and Uber, they will almost always take that passenger's side because they look at you, the driver, as more disposable than the passenger, right? Which is super, super messed up. So I think with all these different things kind of coming into play, do I look at Uber and Lyft as a viable, super long-term career? I always say to people, no. And I have had people tell me, they're like, hey, Mark, I'm driving part-time. I'm loving it. I'm gonna start driving full-time. And I actually have this other gig that I do, but I'm leaving that gig to be a rideshare driver full-time. I say on one end, hey, maybe it will work out for you. I do know some people who have done this and they're happy. They're very happy being rideshare drivers. They look at it as an amazing full-time thing with all these benefits like I just mentioned. But I know too many people who did that and then regretted it. And the reason why is when you drive part-time, not always, but typically for most people, you're driving in, I'm not even gonna call it the peak hours. I'm gonna call it the glory hours, where it's very, very deceptive. You'd, like say, for a lot of people, like say doing a 9-to-5 job, will only drive on a Friday and Saturday night, right? So you're driving from, like say, 8 p.m., like say 9 p.m., I don't know, till 3 a.m., and you're like, wow, I'm getting paid $30 to $35 an hour. It's flexible, it's kind of fun. Like, of course, hopefully no one pukes in your car or anything, right? But you're driving during those times and you're like, wow, I'm making really good money. If I'm making $30 to $35 an hour Friday and Saturday night, that's paying more hourly than my other job. Why not just switch over and do it full time so I can make that all the time? But then you drive all the time or full time and you realize, oh, wow, yeah, you can only really make that money in the peak hours. So it's very deceptive. The jump from part-time to full-time isn't as much as you think. Like, let's say if you're driving part-time and you're doing 20 hours a week, right? Typical part-time hours, and you drive then 40 hours a week, what would be considered full-time, right? Part-time versus full-time. You would think for most people, maybe not in the ride-sharing world, oh, you're gonna double your money. I'm making this up. Let's say you're making, I don't know, $400, I don't know, I'm just making this up. Like you make $400 driving part-time, 20 an hour times 20 hours a week, you're making $400 a week. If you drive 40 hours a week, you're probably gonna double your money to $800 a week. But that's not the case because then you start driving in the non-peak hours. Again, I'll call it the non-glory hours because it's kind of unfortunate. And now you're not making that much money. Granted, there are a lot of different things. If you have, like, say, a minimum hourly guarantee, which we now have here in California, that's a little different. In addition, if you're hitting certain bonus incentives, and the bonuses are what I find the number one way to make the most amount of money, really, if you're getting all these bonuses, then maybe if you're gonna drive more, you might make more money. However, and this is a big thing I do stress because I see so many drivers going into it too much full time, and then they realize all these things I'm mentioning, like, wow, this is not really a long-term career. This is not really something that I want to do forever because of all these different things that start coming about. All you need, and I've had drivers tell me this, they're like, hey, I was driving full time, I had one accident, Uber decided not to cover it. They were being incredibly difficult, or with Lyft, and now they're like, I'm not going to drive for ride sharing ever again. I had one driver tell me that he's like, yeah, I used to drive to put food on the table for my family and everything. I got deactivated for a week and they reactivated me, but now I'm always worried when I drive, am I going to get deactivated again? Because you're an independent contractor, you don't have that much protection. And I know the whole aspect of being an independent contractor versus an employee, whole other subject for a whole other video. I have done some videos about this, but at the end of the day, this is what I say to a lot of drivers who are getting into it. One, of course, start out part-time. I've mentioned that a lot, but two, and I hate to say it, some drivers might disagree with me on this, look at it as a temporary thing. Now, like I said, I do know some drivers who went into it looking at it as a permanent thing, as their actual career. Their career on the resume is rideshare driver, and they love it. They're having an amazing time doing it. No issues, no complaints. But I do find, and I have to be very transparent on this video, I do find those people are far and few between. Most people start off driving and they look at it as almost a bridge. They're like, okay, I left this job because I didn't really like it. I'm going to be an Uber driver or an Uber Eats driver, maybe a delivery driver, right? Kind of the same thing in this case. And I'm going to use that as a bridge just because I'm looking for other jobs. And if you think about it, it is kind of nice to quickly sign up as an Uber and Lyft driver, make on average 20 to 25 an hour. And that way you don't feel pressured to take, let's say, another 9-to-5 job that you probably won't like, right? There is that pressure. And I remember what that feeling's like before Lyft and Uber came about, where I left a job and I'm like, okay, shoot, I have to get another job. And it's that weird situation where you're like, I don't want to immediately jump at the first thing that comes at me because it might be bad. But at the same time, I need the money, right? So it's kind of tricky. With Uber and Lyft, it's a nice bridge. In addition, I know some college students who like to do delivery driving because unfortunately, when it comes to Uber and Lyft, the minimum age for Uber is 21. Lyft typically is 25. It does depend upon your area, but those are the most average ages you need for each app. So for a lot of college kids, unfortunately, you can't really do Uber or, of course, Lyft, but delivery driving, very, very possible because it's a great option. I think you need to be minimum 18 to do it on a bicycle or on foot, minimum 19, like say for like a car or a motorized scooter or something like that. So if you think about it, you could be 19 years old doing delivery driving, and like say you're like, hey, I'm gonna do this between classes, I need to pay for my tuition, all this kind of stuff, or like say you just want beer money, whatever you're trying to do it for, like that allows you to be, like I said, a nice bridge and something that's more in relation to other things you're focusing on. And again, I know this video's kind of touched upon a lot of different points, but at the end of the day, and again, I say this to a lot of people, I do suggest looking at it as a temporary thing, look at it as a job, because for some people who do it, they are just over broke, right? And go into it with that mindset. Go into it being like, okay, I'm now a rideshare driver, but my ultimate goal is to be, I don't know, a computer programmer or a graphic designer or a nurse. I don't know. Your goal is to be something different, because I think over time, and this is what happened to me when I was a full-time driver, over time, you start to realize, especially driving full-time, the benefits aren't as good as they initially seem. That yes, the flexibility, great. Instant cash outs, of course, great. But then all these other little things come up, more maintenance on your car, your brakes get worn out significantly quicker. You may have more and more frustrating people, which makes it a bit more anxiety provoking. Like I know for my cousin, he had some horrible rides where he told me that after those rides, there was this little voice in the back of his head saying, oh, I hope I don't get another difficult person. Now for me, that was never the issue. I really only had one bad person. And after that, didn't really worry about it because I know that 99.9% of the time, most people, pretty cool to be honest, right? But again, these are all these little things that do pop up, making Uber and Lyft, in my opinion, not the best career to focus on. And although I have had drivers be like, hey, Mark, I'm actually going to move. And I've had people tell me this in the comments. I'm going to move to be a rideshare driver in a different city because I know they pay more. I'm going to buy a car just because Uber and Lyft is going to be my career. And don't get me wrong, you can do that and make a good amount of money. I've talked to some drivers recently, actually here in LA, who told me she was driving a lot during the week, pretty much driving as much as she could, like going all out. And she was making about 10-ish K a month. That's pretty good. I mean, if she kept on that, she'd make $120K a year. She was driving an insane amount though. She was going, I mean, aggressively all out. But that does show, in a sense, the power of Lyft and Uber, that if you really put in the time, yes, you can make a lot of money. But looking at it as a long-term career, while some people do get away with it and they love doing it, and given their location and the way things kind of play out, it does work for them. For most people, I suggest looking at it as a temporary thing and as a side job and a bridge from one actual career to the other.